Sarah Mitchell had been looking forward to this blind date all week. Her well-meaning friend Jessica had promised that David was different, kind, and exactly what you need after that last disaster. Sarah had learned to take Jessica's matchmaking attempts with a grain of salt, but this time felt different. David had seemed genuinely interested during their text conversations, asking thoughtful questions about her work as a graphic designer, her love of hiking, her dreams for the future. He'd even remembered that she was allergic to shellfish when making the coffee date reservation. So there she sat, at the small corner table of rosewood coffee, nursing a vanilla latte and watching the door, her heart doing that nervous flutter that comes before any first meeting. Then David walked in, and Sarah's spirits lifted. He was even better looking in person, tall, well dressed in a fitted navy blazer, with confident eyes that seemed to take in the entire room. He spotted her immediately and made his way over with a smile that made her briefly forget about every bad date she'd ever been on. This could actually be something, she thought. This could actually work. The first 20 minutes were wonderful. David was charming, attentive, and funny. He leaned forward when she talked, asked follow-up questions, and seemed genuinely interested in everything she had to say. Sarah felt herself relaxing, laughing more freely, already imagining what a second date might look like. But then the moment came, the moment that would change everything about this evening. A woman at the neighboring table knocked over her coffee, and it spilled across her laptop. The woman gasped, jumping up from her chair, her eyes wide with panic. She was frantically grabbing napkins from the dispenser, trying to wipe down her computer while muttering to herself about losing all her work. She wore a modest cardigan over a simple dress, and her frazzled appearance suggested she'd been working hard on whatever project was now potentially destroyed. It was clear this was someone who didn't have the money to easily replace that laptop if it was damaged. Sarah felt a surge of empathy. She'd been there, struggling, stressed, one small disaster away from feeling completely overwhelmed. She reached for napkins to help when something stopped her. David had grabbed her wrist gently, pulling her back toward their table. "Let her deal with it," he said, settling back in his chair. "It's not really our problem." Sarah was taken aback, but she said nothing. Instead, she watched as the woman continued to frantically try to save her laptop. Something in Sarah's chest tightened. This was a moment when someone could help or not help, and the choice seemed to matter. But then the woman sat back down, and Sarah saw her shoulders slump. She looked like she might cry. That's when Sarah heard David laugh, not a kind laugh, but the kind of laugh that mocks. "Look at her," he whispered to Sarah, his voice dripping with amusement. "A total mess. Can't even keep her life together enough to hold onto a coffee cup. I bet her job is some entry-level nonsense where she's just treading water anyway." Sarah felt something inside her recoil from the cruelty in his voice. She looked at David's handsome face and suddenly saw it clearly, the contempt in his eyes, the way he assumed he could judge this stranger, the casual nature of his mockery. It was repulsive. She wanted to say something, wanted to defend this woman, but instead she found herself frozen by the social awkwardness of the situation. This was supposed to be a nice date. She was supposed to be happy. So she said nothing, and that silence felt like a betrayal. The woman stood up, collecting her damp laptop and her dignity, and moved toward the restroom, probably to get more paper towels. As she passed by their table, David's voice followed her. "Can you imagine being that disorganized?" he said loudly enough for others to hear. A few people looked over. Some seemed uncomfortable. A young couple at another table exchanged glances. But most people just looked away, uncomfortable with the public mockery but unwilling to involve themselves. Sarah felt her face flush with shame, shame that she was sitting with this man, shame that she wasn't saying anything, shame at her own cowardice. She opened her mouth to respond when the door chimed again. Marcus Chen walked in with his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, who was holding his hand and talking animatedly about her day at school. Marcus was in his mid-30s, with warm brown eyes and an easygoing confidence that came from someone comfortable in his own skin. He was dressed simply in jeans and a button-down shirt, his dark hair slightly rumpled as if Emma had been running her fingers through it, which, based on the little girl's giggling, she had been. He was a man who didn't need expensive clothes or a perfect appearance to command a room, because his presence was grounded in something real. Marcus was helping Emma out of her jacket when he noticed the woman who'd just gone to the restroom, and more importantly, he noticed the small pool of cold coffee still sitting on the floor near her vacated table. He noticed the wet napkins, the distress that still lingered in the air. His dad radar, finely tuned from years of single parenting, immediately kicked into gear. He knew that look of someone having a terrible day. He'd had many of them. "Emma, remember we talked about how sometimes people need a little help?" he said quietly to his daughter. Emma nodded solemnly. At 7 years old, she was already learning her father's values through the simple example of his everyday kindness. Marcus grabbed some napkins and quickly cleaned up the spilled coffee from the floor. Then he did something that made Sarah's heart catch. He walked over to the counter, ordered a fresh coffee, and when the barista handed it to him, he added a cookie to the order, the good kind, the expensive kind, the kind the coffee shop saved for special occasions. "Can you tell the lady who was just here that her coffee is ready?" Marcus asked the barista gently. "And the cookie is from someone who thinks she's having a tough day and wanted to help a little." The barista smiled and nodded, understanding immediately. This was the kind of simple human kindness that made people's days better. Marcus went back to his table with Emma, ordered their usual hot chocolate and juice, and as he settled in, he happened to glance over at Sarah and David's table. That's when he heard David's voice, dripping with mockery. "Can you imagine someone being so careless? And now some idiot is buying her coffee like she's charity case. People like that drag everyone down, you know. No ambition, no discipline. They're the reason society has problems." Marcus felt something crystallize in his chest. He wasn't a confrontational man by nature. He'd learned long ago that anger solved nothing, that violence was never the answer, that true strength came from responding thoughtfully rather than reactively. But he also believed, deeply, in the core of his being, that sometimes you had to stand up against cruelty. Sometimes, especially when a child was watching, you had to show them what the right thing looked like. He leaned down to Emma and whispered something in her ear. The little girl nodded seriously, understanding that her father was about to do something important. Marcus stood up, left Emma with her hot chocolate and explicit instructions to stay right there and wait for him, and he walked over to the counter. The woman had just come back from the restroom, her laptop in hand, her eyes red-rimmed from holding back tears. The barista was just handing her the fresh coffee and the cookie. When she saw it, her expression crumpled, and a tear slid down her cheek, but it was a grateful tear, a tear of relief that someone in the world had noticed her struggling and responded with kindness. "Thank you so much," she was saying to the barista, when Marcus appeared beside her. "This is so kind. Did someone order this?" "I did," Marcus said simply. "I noticed you had a rough moment, and I wanted you to know that someone sees you. You're going to be okay." The woman stared at him, this stranger who'd shown her more kindness in a moment than most people showed in a year. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You don't even know me." "That's not how kindness works," Marcus said gently. "We don't help people because we know them. We help them because they need help, and we can." Behind them, Sarah watched this interaction with tears pricking at her own eyes. This was what decency looked like. This was what she should have done. This was the kind of man she actually wanted to be around. David, however, was not watching this with appreciation. He was watching it with something that looked like anger mixed with confusion, as if he couldn't comprehend why someone would do something nice for a stranger when there was nothing in it for them. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "That guy is an idiot. She's nobody. Why does he even care?" Sarah stood up. It was a small moment, a quiet moment, but it was decisive. She looked at David with a clarity she hadn't felt before. "Because," she said, "he's a better person than either of us. And I think I'm done here." She grabbed her purse and walked over to where Marcus stood with the woman, who was now introducing herself as Jennifer, a web developer who'd been having the worst week of her life after losing a major client. Sarah joined the conversation, and within minutes, the three of them were sitting together, talking like old friends. David sat at his abandoned table, stunned, watching his perfectly planned evening collapse in real time. But that wasn't really where this story ends, because there was a moment coming, a moment that would prove just how important Marcus's choice to act had been, and a moment that would show Emma that her father's values were about so much more than simple coffee shop kindness. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself becoming genuine friends with both Jennifer and Marcus. Their coffee shop conversations had blossomed into actual outings, hiking trips where Jennifer got to know Emma, dinners where Sarah learned about Marcus's journey to single fatherhood, a whole world of connection opening up that had nothing to do with romantic interest and everything to do with real human connection. Sarah had even hired Jennifer to redesign her graphic design portfolio, and they'd become business partners with plans to start a joint freelance agency. It was a Wednesday evening when things escalated beyond the simple warmth of newfound friendship into something that would reveal character in its purest form. Sarah was at Marcus's small but cozy apartment, a place decorated with Emma's artwork on every wall, children's books sharing shelf space with philosophy texts, a home that reflected a man trying to build something meaningful for his daughter. They were cooking dinner together while Emma did homework at the dining table, when Sarah's phone rang. It was Jennifer, and her voice was shaking. "I need help," Jennifer said without preamble. "I'm at the police station downtown. They've arrested me, and I can't, Sarah, I can't explain right now, but can you come? I'm scared." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What? Jennifer, what happened?" "David," Jennifer said, and in that single word, Sarah understood everything was about to change. "He showed up at my office with his lawyer today. He's claiming I stole code from a project he was working on. He's pressing charges. He says I used proprietary information to build websites for my new clients." "Sarah, I didn't do this. I've never even worked with him. But he has documents, and his lawyer is presenting them as evidence, and everything looks so damning." "I'm coming," Sarah said immediately. "Don't say anything else. I'm calling a lawyer friend and we're both coming." Sarah hung up and looked at Marcus, who had instantly sensed that something was wrong just from her expression. "Jennifer's in trouble," Sarah said, and she explained the situation quickly. Marcus listened, and Sarah could see the gears turning behind his eyes. "This doesn't sound right," he said quietly. "Jennifer doesn't have that kind of technical knowledge. And she wouldn't do something unethical. This feels personal." "David," Sarah said, understanding dawning. "This is about David. This is revenge because I chose you guys over him that night." "Which means it's my fault," Marcus said, but not in a self-pitying way. It was a statement of fact as he saw it. "I stepped in. I showed him up by being kind, and now he's hurting Jennifer to get back at you because you chose to stand with us instead of with him." Sarah grabbed his arm. "No, this isn't your fault. David's choices are David's responsibility." Marcus was already grabbing his jacket. "Emma, we're going out for a little while. We have to help our friend Jennifer." Emma looked up from her homework with the seriousness of a child who understood that adults sometimes had to do important things. "Is Jennifer sad?" she asked. "She's scared," Marcus said honestly. "And we're going to help her feel braver." The police station was cold and institutional in that way that police stations always are, all harsh lighting and beige walls, the smell of coffee and worry hanging in the air. Jennifer was sitting with a public defender, looking pale and exhausted, when they arrived. A lawyer friend of Sarah's, Rebecca, was already there and had quickly assessed the situation. "It's a civil matter wrapped in a criminal complaint," Rebecca explained as they all sat in a quiet corner of the station. "He's claiming she used proprietary code he developed to create her client websites. The problem is, his evidence is very carefully constructed to look convincing, even though I can already see the holes." "Can you prove it's false?" Marcus asked. "I can," Rebecca said, "but it's going to take time. And in the meantime, Jennifer is facing potential charges that could affect her business, her reputation, everything. The smart play would be for Jennifer to settle with him civilly, pay him off, make this go away." "Which is exactly what he wants," Sarah said bitterly. "He's using the system to punish her because she was kind to her and I rejected him." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke. When he did, his voice carried a quiet authority that Sarah hadn't heard before. "What if there's another way?" he said. "Rebecca, you said his evidence is carefully constructed. That means someone constructed it. That means there's a story in how it was made." Rebecca nodded slowly, understanding where he was going. "You're right. His lawyer, if this lawyer is working with falsified or misrepresented evidence, that's a problem. A serious one. But we'd need to prove that David knowingly created false evidence, not just that he was mistaken. Then we find out what he knew and when he knew it," Marcus said. "Because I'm guessing David's anger made him careless. Angry people always are. What happened over the next week was a masterclass in determination and methodical investigation. Marcus, with help from Sarah and some of Jennifer's tech-savvy colleagues, began to trace the digital breadcrumbs of David's claim. They pulled Jennifer's actual code, examined the dates of creation, cross-referenced them with projects David had supposedly been working on during those same periods. They discovered something interesting. David's code appeared in multiple places online, but Jennifer's code was entirely original, different structure, different approach, different everything. But it was Marcus who realized the real key to unraveling the lie. He suggested that they look at David's professional history, his previous employers, his past relationships. What they found was a pattern. David had a history of this exact behavior, making accusations against people who rejected him, filing complaints against coworkers who didn't admire him enough, creating elaborate stories that always seemed to collapse under scrutiny. He was a man who had learned that chaos could sometimes benefit him, even when the accusations were ultimately proven false, because the stress and fear of being accused was punishment enough. Rebecca took all of this information and went to David's lawyer with a proposition. "You have two options," she told David and his counsel in a meeting at the law office. "Option 1. We go forward, we show the judge everything we have, and we also file a countersuit for malicious prosecution and defamation. We pursue sanctions against your client for filing false reports. We drag this through court, and Jennifer not only wins, but David ends up owing her money and facing potential criminal charges for filing a false report." Option 2. David withdraws his complaint, offers a public apology to Jennifer, and we consider this matter closed. David's lawyer looked at him with new eyes after hearing all the evidence. It became clear very quickly that David's lawyer hadn't known about the history of false accusations, hadn't been told the full truth about David's motivations. A lawyer who realizes they've been used to perpetrate a fraud against the system is a lawyer who becomes very motivated to distance themselves from their client. David folded. He withdrew the charges, wrote a public apology to Jennifer, and essentially disappeared from everyone's lives. But that wasn't the real story. The real story happened afterward, when Jennifer asked Marcus to come for coffee, just the two of them, just for a moment. They sat in the same coffee shop where it had all begun, weeks before. Jennifer had her laptop with her, but it wasn't because she was working. She was emotional, and she kept wiping at her eyes. "I need you to understand something," she said to Marcus. David had power. He had money, he had a lawyer, he had confidence, and he had a story that was just complex enough to be believable. I didn't have any of those things. I had fear and uncertainty and very little money for a defense. By every metric that society values, wealth, confidence, the ability to intimidate, David was stronger than me. "But," Marcus said gently, because he could see there was a but coming. "But you showed me what real strength actually is," Jennifer continued. "You were kind to me when you had nothing to gain. You stood up to David's mockery not because you were angry, not because he'd wronged you, but because you believed it was right. You spent your time, your energy, your mental space helping me fight something that wasn't your problem. That's not weakness, Marcus. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. You didn't punch anyone. You didn't yell. You didn't try to dominate David or prove him wrong for the sake of your ego. You just did the right thing, over and over again, quietly and consistently, until the truth had nowhere to hide." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that Sarah would later tell her therapist was one of the most important things anyone had ever said to her when she was struggling with her own worth. "I learned something after Emma was born," he said. "I learned that strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest or the most willing to hurt people. Strength is about showing up. It's about choosing kindness when it would be easier to look away. It's about defending people who can't defend themselves. It's about raising a daughter, even on my own, even when it's hard, to believe that the world can be good if we make it good. David couldn't hurt me with his mockery because his opinion doesn't determine my worth. And I could stand up to him because I wasn't standing up to win. I was standing up because it was right." In the weeks and months that followed, Jennifer's business grew. With Sarah as a partner and the publicity from standing up to false accusations, particularly with a community that rallied around her, Jennifer became known as not just a talented developer, but as someone with integrity, someone worth supporting. Sarah and Jennifer's joint agency became successful, and they made a point of hiring other developers who had been overlooked by the corporate world, people who had been mocked or underestimated, people who just needed someone to believe in them. Marcus continued his quiet work as a middle school teacher, shaping young minds, showing them through example what it meant to be a decent human being. Emma grew up seeing that kindness wasn't weakness, that standing up for others was strength, that the world was a better place when people chose to make it so. And David faded into obscurity, a man who had everything society told him he should want: confidence, attractiveness, money, but none of the things that actually mattered. He became a cautionary tale, not because his life was destroyed, but because he destroyed his own character through cruelty, and no amount of external trappings could compensate for that internal emptiness. The real lesson of this story isn't about revenge served cold or justice being blind. It's about what happens when good people choose to act. It's about understanding that true strength doesn't announce itself with volume or violence. It whispers in the quiet choice to be kind when cruelty would be easier. It shows up in the decision to help someone who can't help you in return. It lives in a 7-year-old girl watching her father choose compassion over judgment, and internalizing a vision of what a good person looks like. Years later, at Emma's high school graduation, Marcus sat in the audience and watched his daughter give a speech about the people who had shaped her. She talked about her father's quiet kindness, about Jennifer and Sarah's resilience, about what it meant to grow up in a home where doing the right thing was just the right thing. And in the back of the auditorium, Sarah and Jennifer, now business partners and best friends, sat together with tears in their eyes, thinking about that coffee shop, that blind date, that moment when David's mockery could have gone unchallenged, and the single father who chose to intervene. The hook that brought you to this story, the promise of watching someone's true character revealed, comes full circle here. David's character was revealed in his mockery and cruelty. Sarah's character was revealed in her choice to walk away from comfort and status to stand with someone she barely knew. Jennifer's character was revealed in her resilience and her refusal to let false accusations define her worth. But Marcus's character, quiet, consistent, unshakable, was revealed in a moment that cost him nothing but meant everything. A cup of coffee, a cookie, a willingness to help a stranger, a refusal to let cruelty pass unnoticed. These small acts, strung together like beads on a string, created a life of meaning and impact that rippled far beyond anything he could have anticipated.